Hi, everyone who's just joined the webinar. We'll just give the other participants a few moments to join and then we'll begin. Most of the people just joining, we'll get started in a second, just when everyone's joined. Thank you. So welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sarah Ray and I'm an editor at Global Government Forum. And in the session today, we're going to be discussing how to create impactful and inclusive government payment systems. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our panel of expert speakers. But first, just to set some brief context for the discussion that we'll have today. So we've seen that governments around the world have received a series of unprecedented shocks in recent years, from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to the financial aftershocks of the war in Ukraine and an ongoing refugee crisis. In response to pressures such as these, many governments have found that they need modern technology-enabled disbursement programmes that can provide flexible, responsive support to their citizens. So today we're going to look more closely at some of these issues and how these solutions are being used, the benefits, and also some practical recommendations from our panellists. So I'm happy to be joined by some great speakers who will share their thoughts in a moment. And then later in the webinar, we'll take some questions from the audience. So please send yours in throughout the discussion today. You don't need to wait until the end, and we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we look forward to receiving your questions. So to welcome today's panel of speakers, we have Prodromos Pyros, who is the Secretary General for Social Solidarity and Combating Poverty in the Ministry of Social Cohesion and Family Affairs in Greece. Amongst other things, Prodromos is responsible for social policies associated with vulnerable groups, including people with disabilities, the elderly and Roma population. Welcome, Prodromos. Marshall Henry is the Digital Payment and Debit Card Services Director in the Bureau of the Fiscal Service in the US Department of the Treasury. Marshall's focus is on helping the government provide payment services that are modern, seamless, inclusive and secure. Marshall has been with the Treasury for almost 20 years in various roles, seeking to simplify and make federal financial management more efficient. We also have Lee Edmonds, Head of Payment Services, Financial Services at the Crown Commercial Service in the UK. Lee's work focuses on developing value-focused procurement routes for the public sector to access non-core banking payment services, ranging from prepaid purchasing cards to grant funding and administration. This enables £3 billion worth of public sector money to be spent efficiently and enables public sector organisations to access secure, effective payment solutions that maximise citizen reach. And we also are joined by Simon Wright-Lakin, who is the Vice President for the Public Sector Europe Solutions and Outreach at MasterCard. Simon works with a wide range of partners to support the digitalisation of government flows and other public sector services. And areas of focus include the disbursement of funds to citizens and businesses, the payment of fees to governments, and optimising procurement expenditure. So welcome to today's panellists, and we are really looking forward to the discussion. So Simon, if we could start with you, please, because since you work with lots of different governments in this space, so could you give us a bit of an overview of what you are seeing, please, to sort of set the scene for today's discussion?
Yeah, no, will do. And thank you, Sarah, and hi, everyone. So me, when I think about sort of prepaid and disbursements for governments, there's four things that come to my mind around prepaid. There's the thinking about it as a payment vehicle itself and what that means. There's controls and why they're important and why they might be important to government. There's an element of inclusivity and digitalization. And there's also a fourth pillar around data. You know, if I just quickly kind of talk about each of those one at a time. So that first one that I mentioned, that piece about prepaid being a payment vehicle and why that's important. Might be a strange thing for me to say from MasterCard, but people don't get excited about making payments. They get excited about the experiences that it might give them, what they're getting access to, what they're buying with that, the actual notion of the payment isn't of the piece that's exciting to somebody. So something's got to be very easy to do. It's got to be very easy to make payments. It's got to be well understood. And actually, if prepaid is used as a disbursement tool, it's well known. It's a normal kind of card payment transaction that the world is very much used to. It can be used online, at ATMs, at merchants and shops, like any other payment card. It's a very well known and trusted mechanism for making payments. So I think that first piece and that pillar is really important to me, that it's just got such a well trodden and well-known structure and acceptance network that people know how to use that. It doesn't need unique acceptance points. It doesn't need unique training of how to use. It's something that's part of our fabric and society. But when you've got that payment card, and I see prepaid as almost this multifunctional tool, you can build different things around it to help in the disbursement. And that second pillar that I mentioned of controls, there's quite a few different layers to that. You could maybe think about ATM and cash access on or off. Do you want point of sale transactions? Do you want to allow the card to be used online? Do you want it to only work in a jurisdiction, a country of where taxpayers' money is being used to fund that card ultimately and not be used internationally? Do you want the value of a transaction, the number of transactions, to be restricted? What we call in the payment industry the merchant category code, the types of merchants it can be used at, whether that be shops, restaurants, or blocking bars, or different kind of merchant category codes that are relevant for all different types of merchants. Sometimes you even see programs out there that are restricted at a merchant ID level, actually the name of the merchant. Will it work in this brand of location rather than that brand of location? So when you've got all those different kind of controls that you can build around this well-known sort of payment tool, this prepaid card, you can use those controls to create programs for use cases. So just a couple of examples, and it's great that actually with my other panel members, they're going to bring that to life even more of looking at different use cases. But maybe you want a refugee program that you want very open and broad use, but you want to make sure it's only used in the country where the refugee is. Maybe you want virtual or physical cards and you want some kind of meal voucher helping somebody to cover the cost of meals, and you want to restrict it to only be used at certain types of locations and not cash access. Maybe you want a training voucher for small businesses to get online education or cyber tools, and you want that to only work with certain retailers in an online environment. Those controls give you tons of different flexibility to push and pull that prepaid payment vehicle in different directions to meet requirements. Thirdly, I mentioned kind of inclusivity, and I think this is super important in our world today. Lots of different levels to that. First of all, having a payment card that feels and looks like any other payment card can remove a certain amount of stigma compared to other types of disbursements, whether that be different types of vouchers or use cases. You can pay at that supermarket checkout just like anybody else in that queue, and there's no kind of stigma around to it. But at the same time, it gives freedom and flexibility for somebody to spend funds that are being given to support them in the way that it helps them and their personal needs and their family needs. It can be restrictive, it can be open. So it allows, in the right type of use cases, for somebody to be able to buy with dignity the items that are important to them. If we think about a refugee arriving in a country that might not have anything, somebody with a family with medical needs, an individual buying sanitary products, whatever it may be, rather than giving those things in kind, being able to buy things that are personally needed for your circumstance, I think is important. And of course, nowadays, there's that element of digital inclusivity as well, giving people an electronic ways of making payments that again gives them greater access to the world around them. And to answer your question, Sarah, on sort of, where do I see those important points for government? I mean, the last piece is data. On a prepaid card, if we're dispersing funds in a certain way, there's a huge amount of data that we can see on the spend, and we can do a lot of different things with that. This isn't necessarily, in my mind, about seeing what did Simon spend funds on. For me, it's more about evidence-based policy making, actually understanding the impact of a program. You can get what I call management information. What were the average transaction values? What merchants was it used at? How was it used? Times of day, days of the week. And that's really useful to understand the portfolio, how it's used, the demographic use. But actually, we could do a ton more with that. In certain types of disbursement programs, there could be an assumption that maybe the spend is in more of a deprived recovering area of a city. We can see how public sector funds are being spent in an area that has a halo effect to actually kind of bring more spend and recovery to that area. Yes, the disbursement helps an individual alone, but what's it also doing for the area where it's spent? Is it being spent at small businesses? Which type of organisations? There's something that I refer to always as the multiplier effect. That for every dollar, euro, pound that gets dispersed, when that's spent, there's taxes on those goods that are bought and services. In those stores, there's salaries being paid. When those salaries are paid to individuals, they go and spend. All the money dispersed has a much broader multiplier effect on the broader economy. By thinking about the type of disbursements, we can look at that, we can analyse that, we can understand that, and we can do a lot more around that, as I say, the evidence-based policy making. So in this kind of opening statement, Sarah, yeah, I'd think about those 4 sort of key points around the stability and the payment mechanism itself, number 1, the controls that we can do around a product, inclusivity and how important is that, and the data are the things that come to mind for me as being very important.
Brilliant, thank you. So it's good to get a bit of an overview about how these systems work a bit better to set the scene, then to see some examples of how they are being used. And we'll come back to some questions about the points you've raised later, so thank you, Simon. So Prodromos, I'll come to you, and could you tell us a bit about some of the changes that are happening in Greece that are ushering in new payment solutions?
Thank you, Sarah. And following up on what Simon mentioned about the benefits that we derive from prepaid cards, we have designed, and we are in the process of implementing a major reform regarding social protection in Greece that contains the introduction of a single prepaid card for the delivery of the vast majority of the benefits that are being given by the Organization of Welfare Benefits in Greece and by the Employment Agency. Just to give you a few examples of what we are talking about, we're talking about all childcare benefits, unemployment benefits, other one-off payments that we have, and guaranteed minimum income. In total, we are talking about approximately 3 billion benefits that will be given through this new scheme. And the recipients, we believe them to be about 1.4 million in a population of 10 million in Greece. So we are talking about a large-scale reform that we are undertaking. So the logic behind this reform was that we needed a system that would simplify procedures for all the recipients of some form of benefit or payment. And the prepaid card is a way to do so, as any changes that one might need to have in the benefits will not need additional will not need to go through additional red tape, and the prepaid simplifies and streamlines a lot of the procedures that are being needed now, right now. It increases transparency, as it has already been mentioned, and also it decreases the informal part of the economy as cash circulation will be diminished. At this point, I want to mention that by introducing this card, essentially we give the right for the recipient of the card to spend 50% of the total amount that he or she gets in cash and 50% through this card. So essentially, we are significantly decrease cash circulation in the market. And I would also like to mention, because I'm in charge of a number of policies with regard to vulnerable groups, that also the removing the stigma is also a key driver behind our policies, because through this card, one would not know in a transaction through this card, one would not know what is the source of the income, and in that sense, this would facilitate the process and would remove the obstacles that we have identified in spending money through specific benefits and in using these benefits. So that essentially we expect as a result of that to increase the take-up rate of specific benefits. So there are a number of advantages that we derive from introducing this reform. I have to say that this process has not been without challenges, many technical challenges, as others might be more aware of. There are, for instance, there is a big number of payment service providers in Greece that we have to bring them all together to create all the information system that would facilitate the reform, to interconnect the two organizations that I mentioned with the payment service providers. And this is a major reform that will at a very big scale for Greek standards, but we expect to derive a lot of benefits, and this is why we are proceeding with that at a fast rate, and we expect the new system to be in place by the end of the first quarter 2025.
Thank you. So we will definitely come back to you later in the webinar about some of the things that you've learned so far and some of the challenges that you mentioned. So thank you for that. So Marshall, if we could go to you, can you bring us the view and experience from the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, please?
Certainly. In the US, we're a robust user of prepaid debit card services. For over a decade and a half, we've stood up a major program that has really empowered us to be more effective and inclusive. We have attacked so many different use cases with this tool that we've actually spun up a secondary program to address additional use cases that I'll touch on. The biggest story that I have to share is the success we've had with the Direct Express prepaid MasterCard. This program is what we refer to as our entryway to financial inclusion. It is how we deliver electronic benefits to the underbanked or unbanked population in the US. This will be benefits from retirement for Social Security in the US and or special causes for veterans. They may receive payments on a monthly basis. These payments may be lifeline payments that the recipient needs to receive to make payments for rent or to acquire food. This program that we stood up has been incredibly impactful here. I think we set out to solve two problems, two of the four pillars that Simon mentioned. We may have set out to realize the benefits for, specifically leveraging the payment vehicle and improving inclusivity. We've realized the benefit from the other two pillars, the controls that it gives us, the fraud prevention, the customer-friendly fraud services, and then the data that we get from the service, allowing us to see Is the program being effective? How are the citizens adapting to it? The Direct Express program is of tremendous scale. It's 3.6 million active cardholders receive payments. We have another, I think, 1.5 million that are inactive that may, depending on their status with the government, may begin receiving payments again. Over about 41 billion US dollars are held on these cards. One of the lessons we've learned early in the journey is that providing the card can solve a lot of the government's problems, but we need to also provide education to the recipient of the card in order for them to get the most out of it. So one of the stories that's commonly told is, as we rolled out the service, we would send a card to a recipient, and the recipient would get the card, go to the ATM, take all the money off of the card, and then go back to living just the way they did before, not getting a lot of the controls, the fraud prevention, and the desired use, the desired benefit that we wanted to provide them. As we educate them on how they can better use those cards, our goal is that this is not just an attempt at financial inclusion, but they will become more sound and ultimately become financially resilient through the use and participation in the economy. The sister service that I mentioned that we stood up, the US debit card, is for the use cases that we have that are not benefit payments. A big example here that I wanted to share was our use during the COVID-19 pandemic. When the pandemic hit, we, as the rest of the world did, shut down and needed to provide assistance to citizens very quickly. Our typical mode of providing assistance would be to send checks out to every citizen. And the pandemic offered us a really challenging situation where the check production capacity we had would take many months. Not only that, but when the citizen received the check, there could be significant delays. When they did receive the check, many of them would have to go to a bank or go to a check casher in order to get those funds, which was maybe not an option during the pandemic. The use of prepaid debit card really gave us a new vehicle, a new payment vehicle to provide this assistance to citizens, not only quickly, but with some oversight and some controls. We were able to see that the citizen received the card and activated it. We were able to tell that within 10 days of providing that card, that the citizen was using it and that the program was working. That level of insight is not something that we had when we mail our paper payments out to citizens. Today, a lot of the use cases we see with this service might be with the US military or with large conventions where a citizen might, or an employee even might go and need to receive a stipend for meals or for training. You might be able to provide them that prepaid debit card and they put all of their meals on while they're on site on that card. When they're done using it, we might be able to pull that money back, so there's less waste. A lot of these cases we used to provide vouchers for. We're getting those vouchers out of the government. Gives us better transparency. It allows us to have less waste as well. All of these services that we have. One of the benefits that we have realized at Treasury is as fraud rates across the country go up, particularly with paper transactions over the last 5 years, we are realizing the secure, the controls and the flexibility we have with this payment vehicle, both for the government's interests and for our customers' interests. It's been a wonderful learning for us.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And we'll definitely pick up on your point later on about the messaging to recipients and the financial education element. So thank you for raising that. And then could we go to Lee, and could you tell us a bit about the role of the Crown Commercial Service for those who are not familiar, and the types of use cases and examples of prepaid disbursement solutions that you're seeing?
Sure, thank you, Sarah. Hi, I'm Lee Edmonds. I work within Crown Commercials, the UK's Crown Commercial Service. I'm just going to canter through a couple of slides that talk to you about what that is and what we do for the UK public sector. and then how we've put kind of financial services, payments and prepaids in particular at the forefront of our thinking in this space. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. So Crown Commercial Service is a non-departmental public body, so an executive agency, if you will, of the UK's Cabinet Office. So we are a part of the public sector, but we operate on behalf of the public sector. We're a public sector buying organisation, and what that means is whether there are common goods and services that either are procured on a local or national level, we create the vehicles, the contracts, the commercial agreements, dynamic marketplaces that allow the public sector to leverage its economies of scale. So ultimately buy as one and therefore get a better deal for the public sector for those common goods and services. We create value for the public sector in doing that through our commercial expertise in specific areas, but also in the development and management of those contracts, framework agreements and marketplaces on behalf of public sector buyers. We provide contract management, commercial advice, commercial guidance, and ultimately bring together the public sector as one to buy as one. If we just move on to the next slide. So just to give you an idea of the scale, through CCS as a whole, we buy everything from paper to satellites and everything in between ultimately. And about 31 billion is spent through our commercial agreements annually. These are last year's full results. 11.5 billion in the wider public sector. So that's localized provision as opposed to central government, and 19.5 billion within the central government sphere. And we delivered about 3.8 billion in commercial benefits. What's that? Well, essentially that is what is derived by the public sector through using this consolidated centralized service that we provide as a public sector buying organisation. And we serve around about 20,000 customers. So that's not individuals, that's 20,000 individual public sector entities or organisations. And there are about 3,000 suppliers who generate spend or generate revenue through the utilisation of Crown Commercial Services public sector frameworks. So just a little bit about us before I move on to what I do for Crown Commercial Service. If we canter on to the next slide, please. So I look after payment services. I'm the head of payment services for CCS, and that incorporates a number of different vertical products and services. So we're looking at kind of fairly nascent technology, open banking, so how citizens and businesses pay things like taxes, purchasing cards, so how we pay our suppliers and ensure prompt payment and delivery of funds into businesses that we work with. Prepaids and vouchers, which I'll come on to in more depth, obviously, is the subject of today. How we pay for fuel, so how ambulances, the police, fire, utilise public infrastructure to pay for their vehicles while on the road. And then funds administration and disbursement, so how public sector organisations, local and central, distribute things like grant funding and loans to citizens and businesses to deliver public services. Now, in all of this, including the prepaid and vouchers world, our considerations are kind of multiple. It's all about delivering value. So we look at innovation, quality, coverage, choice, cost efficiency, inclusion and social value. We have to look through each of those lenses when we're thinking about what products and services the public sector needs to utilise to deliver efficiently for citizens and businesses. And prepaid cards have offered us all of those elements, if you will, in terms of the delivery of the service. And if we come on to the next slide, I'll talk in a little bit more depth about that. So focusing on prepaid cards, why do we use them within the UK public sector? Two reasons, really. Choice. So ultimately, we provide citizens with the choice within which they receive funds that are distributed from local and central government, but actually through need as well, and that's really, really important. Some of the use cases for prepaid cards in the UK public sector. So welfare, as mentioned by Piros and Marshall, when we're paying certain elements of benefits, whether that be local or central benefits, we utilise prepaid cards to enable us to get funds into the hands predominantly of those who don't have bank accounts. That includes asylum support. So there's around about 100,000 people in the UK receiving asylum support from the UK government. They don't have bank accounts, they can't qualify for bank accounts. So prepaid cards offer us an effective way of providing funds quickly, effectively, seamlessly, with all of the benefits that have been mentioned by my colleagues on the panel earlier, including fraud prevention, access to digital e-commerce services, access to cash when required, but also an efficient, effective means of us getting money out to them quickly and effectively. And that's really important in the next category, emergencies. So disaster support, and that might be one-off payments in the case of a flood or other weather-related disaster. It also might include cost of living support. So we've been through a cost of living crisis in the UK over a number of years, and the government has stepped in and provided funds to disadvantaged communities, to families and people with financial difficulty in particular. And again, prepaid cards allows us to make those payments effectively, quickly, without the need for gathering bank account information and data, which can be particularly difficult in the unbanked, in the case of the unbanked. Then social care, as Piros mentioned earlier, really important is our ability to remove stigma. So in the case of supporting social care provision and the payments for social care provision in the UK, what we want is those receiving payments for social care to actually have the same level of access to products and services to make payments as anybody would within civil society. And prepaid cards allows them to do that. You would not know that you are using a UK government issued prepaid card because it is no different from a debit or credit card provided by an external service provider. It also is used for self-directed support, so where individuals are responsible for making payments to sector organisations for care or care-related services. We would provide a payment through a prepaid card to allow them to pay individuals or businesses to provide those support services. And then it also supports a range of social policy initiatives as well. So one that is particularly interesting is the Best Start food scheme in Scotland. And this is essentially, again, people who qualify for certain income-related benefits may receive payment to when they have a child under the age of 3. And this is to ensure that those children, their children, are getting healthy foods. So to incentivise parents to pay for healthy foods, buy healthy foods, they're issued with a prepaid card that they can utilise with a certain limited amount of funds to buy those foods. So again, it enables us to rapidly deploy funds to support social policy initiatives really quickly and effectively. So there's a number of different use cases, and we can touch upon those as I'm sure we will in the discussion later. But that's all underpinned by a number of trends that are occurring within the UK, and I'm sure across Europe and globally as well. So the increased use of cards, it's expected to be 60% of all UK transactions in 2024. So back to the choice and the demand related aspect of this. People are used to using cards, having access to cards to pay for goods and services. And then into the next cloud, if you will, e-commerce. So around about 27.5% of retail spend, according to the Office of National Statistics, is through e-commerce. So ultimately utilising a card to pay for e-commerce services and providing that choice and enabling citizens to do that. And then our target market, as I've said, welfare benefit cases, social care provision, social policy initiatives. Around about 2% of the UK population is unbanked, so that's about 1.1 million adults. So clearly we need a mechanism to get money out into the hands of those people who are often financially vulnerable or experiencing financial difficulty. And the prepaid card has provided an effective solution to do that. And that's either on an open loop or a closed loop basis. So actually restricted funds for restricted merchants, as mentioned earlier by my colleagues, or actually providing cash that can be spent anywhere through e-commerce, retail, or drawing out through a cash machine as well. We've got the flexibility, we've got the scale, and we've got the controls through the prepaid card services that will enable us to do this. And so it's been a really successful programme of activity covering both localised and national provision for the UK government that is continuing to grow. I'll pause there, Sarah.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And we're already starting to get a lot of questions in, so it's probably obviously provided people with a lot to think about, but please continue to send your questions in and we're going to try to answer as many of those as possible. So thanks to the panel for setting the scene so well there. And just to begin with, I wanted to pick up on, obviously, Simon, you mentioned the data that can be provided and some of the use cases for that. So I wanted to ask the panel about how they're thinking about that. So if I could go to you first, Marshall, could you share with us anything about the data and how that's helping you?
Ultimately, the use of the data that we get from this is we can use it to answer a lot of questions, but the most important is are the programs being effective? We had very little insight into the effectiveness of our programs once the money went out the door prior to the use of prepaid debit cards. With the use of prepaid debit cards, we can have data to help us know that the money got where we sent it. Two, we can also have data to help us understand the behavior of our customers. We certainly are very aware that we don't want to know what the recipient bought at the store, but we do want to know, are they actually using the money for the lifeline, for pay their rent, to get for the intended use, or are they receiving it and not using it at all? That high level data really helps us steer our programs and let us know if they're being effective. It also helps. Go ahead.
No, you please go ahead.
It also gives us a little insight and snapshot into fraud prevention and fraud monitoring that we simply didn't have before. Citizens that would receive a check and go to a bank, if they were to lose those funds, we have no insight, no traceability. With the use of a debit card, we now have the ability to shut off future disbursements, to monitor, to provide some assistance, and to provide some customer tools and services to help them when they really are victims of fraud.
Excellent, thanks. And you've answered part of it there, but I was just going to ask you if there are any examples of ways that you have acted on this data that you wouldn't have been able to, do as quickly previously.
We've adjusted our policy. We allow one ATM use per disbursement, so that citizens that are receiving these benefits might be able to go get cash if they needed to pay their rent by cash. We wanted to make sure that we enabled that. We've adjusted some of our policies to help steer them more towards, but after watching their behavior, to help steer them more towards using the card for commerce. So we still allow that one ATM deposit, but we have adjusted some controls about where it can be used and when to help steer them to what we think is a more intended use of the funds.
Excellent, thank you. And Prodromos, as you roll out this program, how are you thinking about the data, about what you might like to understand and how you might then use that information?
Well, obviously we want to get a number of data through this scheme, obviously following all the GDPR rules and everything else that the DPOs are telling us, because that will inform our social policy as well. It will give us insight about what we have done well and what we need to improve with regard to our social policies. And alongside other reforms that we're implementing with regard to benefits delivery, a single registry, other legislative initiatives that we are undertaking, we hope to create an effective and coherent system that will give more to the ones that are in need, and at the same time help us get the information we need to make the system more efficient, and also address issues of fraud as well and other misuses of the benefit system that we may have. One last remark, one thing that I forgot to mention in my previous remark is that we're also introducing a lottery system whereby approximately, I think, 8,000 recipients will receive a disbursement of 1,000 based on the use that they are doing on with the prepaid card. And this is an extra incentive to use the prepaid card and make it more attractive for the entirety of the transaction, not only the 50% that would be obligatory.
Excellent, that's really interesting, thank you. And Lee, do you have any insights on the data side of this and the value of the data and how it can be used to make improvements?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of things, and it differs across the different use cases, if you will. So as mentioned by some of my fellow panelists earlier, what's really, really useful is when you can kind of understand and see that the money's been used for the intended purpose. So ultimately, we can see within social care the money that's paid onto a prepaid card that is intended for the utilisation of social care is paid to a social care provider, for example, or to a social care equipment provider. That's really simple and really effective. It's different when it comes to some of our other social policy initiatives. So if we've got an open loop card where we're just providing funds and actually we're not looking to be prescriptive as to where those funds are spent, that's fine. But it may be a social policy initiative as like the one I've described earlier, where we're saying, actually, this is intended to buy healthy foods. So we could lock that down to specific merchants, so retailers who operate in the grocery space, but we can't tell that they bought healthy foods. So that we've got some top level data, which is really useful in terms of, are they spending it at the merchants where we think they would spend it on? Are they spending it on healthy food, or are they spending it on something else that we wouldn't necessarily want to incentivize? We don't know at this stage. So I think there's a way to go in terms of understanding what we can do more of in that space. But we've got a really great start, particularly where there's an obvious kind of tracking ability with regards to the data, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And Simon, do you have anything further to add on how governments can set themselves up to best make the use of this data?
I think only maybe by adding an example, because I think that's always useful to bring it to life a bit more. I was aware of a couple of different programs actually around Europe after COVID. They were kind of economic stimulus cards, economic recovery cards, governments supporting by giving funds to people to spend on the high street. They were exactly able to see how that money was spent, what the activation rates were, what the uses were, which type of merchants on which days, and really kind of build up then an image and a portfolio and report on the success. And I think that piece around the success is really important. Everybody, whether it's private or public sector, is under more pressure to do more with less. So I think if we can show that and we can report that and we can demonstrate the value of what's happened with taxpayers' money, that's valuable. That's really important. So that was, if you like, a nice example to bring it to life, where I saw funds being used, government funds, taxpayers' money, to incentivize spend to help the economy recover, because it was paid out on a card in that way at an anonymized level, at an aggregated level, so not personal information. We're able to see those impacts, and that was able to then sort of create positive messages and communications on the value that the governments were bringing to society.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to take a couple of the questions that have come in from the audience now. So one of them is around the administration required for these programs, and also related to that, there's a question about issues and troubleshooting, if there's a forgotten PIN, a lost card, that kind of thing. People in the audience are interested to know how you manage that, and I'll just start with you, Simon, what you see there, maybe how you see that being managed, and then I'll get some examples from the other panelists.
No, sure, thank you. I saw a couple of questions on that. I think it's important to step back and maybe talk about the partnership structure that you might have for running a card, and how I kind of see it in my mind. We've got the government, we've got the public sector that are going to be thinking about what a program needs to do, what the success of that program looks like, how we want to help people, what we want the results to look like. That'll be built in partnership with an issuer or program manager. Sometimes they get referred to a bank to provide that solution. The reason why I mention that, Sarah, is because that partner that the government is going to be able to help and support with a lot of those items that you've mentioned, the how to manage a lost PIN, a lost card, queries. It can be the government, it can be a public sector department dealing with those, and maybe they've got some sort of system into the bank so they can manage those queries. Or it can be the banking partner providing those services, those solutions on behalf of the government and the public sector entity. That might be via app, via call center, via online, the traditional sort of multi-service channels that we're looking at, but they would be providing that on behalf of. So there wouldn't be necessarily this huge administrative burden that you've got to all of a sudden think about, I need a call center to service all these things. I hope this is taken with the intent it's intended, but let the experts deal with those queries. They're used to dealing with card queries. They're used to managing them. Let those people manage that and take care of that for you.
Great. Marshall, anything to add there about how that works for you guys?
We have implemented a model similar to Simon mentioned, and we've achieved some economies of scale by getting multiple federal agencies sending their benefits via one card through a financial partner, a bank, to citizens. As we have that partnership and that structure put in place, one of the challenges we have, though, is communicating to a citizen that is not familiar with government, is not familiar with banking, why these different parties are involved and who does what. It is very foreign to most citizens. We may have a citizen, I can think of one case where a citizen reached out to a politician asking for a new card. That of course resulted in a lot of turmoil and not a new card. We need to get them asking the bank for the new card. We also may have the reverse where a citizen reaches out to the bank and inquires about their benefit and their eligibility for that benefit with the government. It has been a constant struggle to help customers know who to contact when, what that partnership looks like, and put it into terms that really resonate with someone that's not familiar with either banking or government.
And are there any successes you've had with the messaging there that you can sort of mention that have helped you to do that?
Lots of successes. I mentioned a large scale over 3.6 million customers. So sometimes these little examples that I mentioned slip through the cracks, but on the broad scale, tremendous success. Part of what we had to focus on was education, not only on who does what, but what do these terms mean? What is a debit? What is a credit? How do you use a card? What are the benefits? Simple things like that, starting and putting those communications both in the packet when they receive their card, but also online as they go to their account, making it available to them to help bring them to a common level of terminology, to help them empower themselves really to find the answers to the questions.
Brilliant. Prodromos, I'll come to you as well then on the administration of the programme, how you're managing that, and also to pick up on Marshall's point about the messaging so that you have the opportunity to get this right from the start and make everything as clear as possible to the recipients.
Yeah, what we have tried to do is what Simon mentioned, that we tried to outsource the practical part of the reform, meaning that the payment service providers, essentially the banks, would be the ones that will issue the card, and would have to deal with all the operational issues that are associated with it. So the challenge that we faced is that how we could at the same time have the recipient of one benefit applying at the state agency, and at the same time interconnect this agency with the payment provider, with the aim to have to carry out the preparatory work that needs to be done to issue the card in time. So that was an operational challenge that we faced. We hope that it will work quite well. And we have also adjusted the legislative framework that in a certain manner that would facilitate that process and that would make life easier for the recipients of the card.
Thank you. Lee, is there anything that you would like to add on the administration of the programmes and also the messaging to send out to get this right?
Yeah, firstly, I love Marshall's example of somebody reaching out to a politician to ask for it. I think that's fantastic. I'd love to have seen their face. So similar to that which has been described, it's an outsourced operation ultimately, and it operates in two ways, similar to that which when you have a debit or a credit card in the UK in any instance. So you've got access typically to a contact centre for any queries or issues as a citizen or user of the card, and or a cardholder portal as well, so you can self-serve online. We've got specific information that will allow you access to specific tools and or services with regards to your card. So we're not seeing the stand-up of any kind of infrastructure locally or nationally to support this. it is relying upon the experts that deal with this in this space, in the financial services sector. There's also a need for them to be regulated by the UK's Financial Conduct Authority. So ultimately, anybody engaging with the service can check that this is a provider that is a regulated provider and a trusted provider in that instance. And in terms of messaging, what we see is typically the larger nationalised programmes are publicised via the media. So ultimately what we've seen is the media publicise the fact that prepaid cards are being utilised for the specific provision of services in specific instances. So that kind of builds a kind of knowledge, trust and understanding that this is going to happen within those populations. And then secondarily, on every website of every organisation that's using this, whether it be a local authority, local council or central government, there will be reference to the programme, the prepaid card provider, what it entails, how it's used, etc., etc. So that kind of educational piece is accessible via online content as well as through the media. And then, you know, if cards are issued on a physical basis, because we have quite a significant virtual card program as well, then additional information is provided when the card is issued as well. So fairly similar to that which Marshall described and which Pyrrhos intends to implement.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had a few questions in about the control mechanisms, which Simon and the other panelists have mentioned. So Marshall, for you, someone's asking about, for the Best Start Foods programme, how do you ensure that the funds are spent on healthy foods? Is that something that you can?
It's best to talk about some capabilities there of what we have more than a specific example. One of the benefits of the prepaid card program that we have, depending on the use case and the agency that we're representing as we set it up, is the ability to set up controls with the merchant codes and types of merchants that might be available. In theory, I'm not sure it would go down to that granular level of healthy food.
Yes.
But in theory, the structure set up that is enabled through the use of prepaid card could help you direct what merchants are applicable and not applicable. Again, I'm not sure that that's healthy and unhealthy as a distinction in that world, but it is a capability that the service offers us. We do have a segment of card recipients for the US debit card program that are actually receiving what we call government funds and not personal funds. And so they're using these funds for government business. And we do have quite extensive controls on the types of merchants that they can go and use those government funds at.
We've had a few questions in about costs. So Simon, perhaps you could tell us sort of in a high level about a bit how this compares to maybe traditional systems and the economies of scale that have been mentioned.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really important question, and where from experience, and again, maybe the panel members have a view on this, is that when we look at a card program and we're thinking about prepaid disbursements, it's quite clear the costing and the structure of that. Whereas maybe if we're comparing it to something else, maybe that is less clear. Because if it's cash being dispersed, transmitting into an account, all those different areas, it can be more across various different processes or sort of within government. And it almost has a bit of a hidden cost. So I think first of all, Sarah, there's a need for a bit of a real detailed analysis, because if it's important to look at apples versus apples versus apples versus pears, right? That if I get a pricing proposal and I'm looking at a card, it's almost I get an invoice from a bank for providing a service, whereas traditionally it might be across many different departments. On top of that, there's then more the other elements of cost to build into the business case for consideration, kind of more leakage, misuse, understanding, actually, yes, we've talked about some of those controls. We can put lots of controls in so funds are used as intended. Does it go down to basket level, as I call it? Not always, but it does a lot more than cash. How do you compare and build into the business case what that looks like, and the use case and the opportunity? But also actually around those pieces around the unbanked individuals and what's needed. Very difficult to sort of how do you quantify that in pounds, dollars, and euros when actually maybe somebody doesn't have a bank account, but they need one in society nowadays? And I think Lee mentioned the 1 or 2% or so in the UK unbanked. You know, how do we support those people so they can access the digital economy? So first of all, I think there's a piece there about actually understanding, you know, what do I want from the business case rather than just costs of provision of services, a whole broader piece to consider and build into that. But then secondly, there's a few other bits that we consider. Do I need physical plastic? Should I just go for virtual? What's the sort of use case on here? What servicing model do I want to use? It might be quite an obvious statement to make, but if I provide more services, more solutions, build up this product so it's more like a general banking product, the costs go up for the providing of the service. If it's an electronic voucher that I'm going to load some money on to buy white goods, you know, a washing machine, a fridge, a freezer from a particular retailer, it's a little bit more simplistic in approach. So again, it's also thinking about what do I want that product to do to get those costs right. So rather than it's a bit difficult to say it's this versus that, because there's a whole host of different things that we want to consider around what do we want to achieve, who are we trying to reach, what results do we want out of the product, what experiences do we want the individuals to have with the product, and scale as well. The greater the scalability, the greater the cost efficiencies around that. So how do we build something that has multi-use? I mean, that's a challenge for government nowadays because there's more and more use cases. I need to support these people with this, these people with this group of people need that. So trying to find, again, those flexible solutions that give multiple so we can get greater scalability is the sort of things that I think about around those costs.
Great, and Lee, that's obviously something that you've thought about a lot. Is there anything that you would like to add there?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of instances, though, if we get down to brass tacks, what are we looking for an alternative to issuing checks or issuing cash? And actually, it's a lot more cost effective than issuing checks and issuing cash. You know, I can't give you numbers because I'm cutting across multiple organisations, but the case for change is quite easily made in financial terms when it comes to actually serving the unbanked. We'd either pay them with a cheque or we'd pay them with cash. So from a financial case, that's easily met. But to Simon's point, there's a lot more that goes into our business cases. So we think about a PEST analysis or political, economic, social, legislative, environmental. There are all sorts of benefits associated with this. People traditionally think of cards as being plastic, but actually, as I said, we've got a significant virtual program across a variety of our different card use cases, not just prepaids. So we're reducing the environmental footprint of not utilising plastic, for example, or producing paper or issuing physical checks or having physical operations in government hubs to deliver this. There's a lot of benefits that are indirect as a result of utilising these products and services too. But yeah, you know, the tall and short of it is if we were to pay these funds using cash or via a cheque, it would be a heck of a lot more expensive. Prepaids offers us an alternative that is more cost efficient, plus all of those other benefits too.
Brilliant. Prodromos, is that in line with your thinking? Is that what you found in scoping out this programme, or is there any other angle you'd like to add?
Yes, it is to a very large extent in line with what we are trying to address. I would like to add something more that we are, through prepaid cards, we are also addressing a number of other logistical problems that we have faced. For instance, we had a number of recipients that they got their benefits through mail. So this is a loophole that we are now trying to close. And because up until now you had like the recipients of the bank accounts, and a number like about 10% or more that got some form of benefit through mail. By introducing the card, we are also decreasing the cost for the mail service increase, and we are, so as I mentioned before, we are also dealing to a large extent with the red tape, both for the state and the state agencies, and for the banking system.
Right. Marshall, anything to add there?
I can concur with all the observations. The cost savings metrics that we have for the government is astronomically cheaper to distribute money this way. When you factor in the time that it takes to process a check transaction, it's becomes the business case just is very obvious. But there is another cost savings element that we see and that we think find very valuable, and that is the cost to the recipient as well. We did have a number of benefit recipients that would receive their check and go to a check cashing location and pay exorbitant fees to have that money, that check cashed. We're removing that burden from them. They're actually getting use of these funds and a larger chunk of these funds, we believe, through the use of debit cards. So it is a savings for us and savings for the recipient as well.
Brilliant. A quick technical question for you, Simon. Is there the ability to freeze or recall funds on a specific lost card and then transfer that balance to a new replacement card?
So I'm going to say yes. To answer very quick. With the bank, the partner that you work with, there are many now that can do that. It is a good question because if a card's lost, yes, you can move that to a new card, but also recover disbursements. And it's kind of linked to that question as well, that actually, if I give you cash, it's gone. If I pay funds into a bank account, it's gone. But if I give you 100 euros for buying something specific, you might spend 95. And it was that transaction is done. You can unload that remaining €5 and bring that back to the government. You start thinking about that on a mass scale of actually being able to recoup unspent funds. In that same way to the question was asked about kind of if you lose a card, that ability to load but also unload can be really interesting as well.
And also another quick one around, someone's asked about negative balances and whether this might increase the risk for the department responsible for the funds. So if someone's getting a disbursement weekly, for instance, and then they use something like an Oyster card, which is the London system for paying for tubes and buses and things, that could put them into a negative balance. Can you answer that one at all?
Yeah, very, very technical question. So I think maybe to help on the question, on some transit networks, you tap your card to get in, you don't know the value of the transaction until the end of the day when you've finished. So how do you manage those transactions? Because you might have less balance on the card than the transaction value of the travel, I think is the question, to put it in a different way. So what can we do about that? First, it's all around risk and profiles again. First of all, transit transactions typically are very, very low value, a bus fare, a tube fare. So once it happens once, and then that card couldn't settle that card would be blocked from any more transactions on there. So first of all, the actual size of the risk is small, maybe compared to the millions or even billions that might be dispersed. Secondly, depending on the type of use case, you might not allow transit transactions. If I'm giving you this product to buy food, then what we can do is not allow it to work in those sort of environments. And also sometimes you can have what's called online only transactions. So it has to complete a transaction. You can't do offline transactions. There's not really a definitive answer because, again, it depends on this use case for these people. Is it more of a general purpose social benefit program that you want to not restrict people's use anymore? You need to be aware of it and manage the risk. But actually, is it something more specific for a specific need? Well, let's take away that risk because that's not how the card should be used anyway. So we'd approach it really more on a program by program to kind of keep the risk as low as possible.
Brilliant. So we've had a question in about obstacles to deploying digital disbursement programs. So I'd like to roll that in with another question. So if some of the panel could share some of the challenges or obstacles they've observed, or perhaps just a takeaway that they've learned through this process that they might share with their peers elsewhere who are going through something similar or considering it. So Prodromos, if we could start with you, you mentioned that there have been some challenges along the way, so perhaps you have something to share there.
Yes, one of the challenges, for instance, from an operational perspective, was how to close that loophole that we had through giving benefits through post. That was a practical issue. One other that we identified was when we created the perimeter of the benefits that we would include in the reform. Initially, we had disability benefits as well, and there we found out that, like, for a number of disabled persons, using a prepaid card is not feasible. So we excluded, for instance, benefits that are associated with disability, with persons with disabilities, and also we have excluded from the program persons that have a specific percentage of visual impairment. So we had to create a comprehensive framework that would be, on the one hand, would be efficient and include a significant number of the benefits that we are currently having, and at the same time do not put in place, do not include benefits that would inhibit people from accessing the money and the sources they are entitled to. So that was something that we had to deal with, and I hope we have done it to a large extent successfully. We will see that in practice soon.
Thank you. Lee, any challenges overcome or sort of best practices, lessons to share with people in the audience who are thinking about this? You're on mute.
Probably welcomed by all, to be honest. Yeah, so I guess one of the things that, and I don't want to steal Marshall's thunder because they've got some large-scale examples of this, is the education piece. And I don't just mean financial education. You know, up until recently, and still to an extent, there is a digital divide as well. So the kind of utilisation and access to some of the resources associated with credit, debit card facilities, and in this instance, prepaid facilities, are online. So accessing information, accessing PIN, accessing data, it's online. So ensuring that the individuals, intended recipients, have got the capability to utilise the product effectively, not just from a financial management perspective, which is really important, but actually, can they access the product? Can they get their PIN? Can they deal with issues, any queries, etc.? Can they serve themselves in the kind of utilisation of that product? So the whole education piece and working critically in partnership with the right providers of these services is really key. And actually establishing the right requirements within your contract. So understanding the market, understanding the capability, understanding what your requirements are, but more importantly, what the recipient's requirements are, and making sure they are catered for, contracted and set out really clearly with the contract with your provider, and then ensuring that they deliver ultimately. So that they're the kind of key things that from a procurement organization we've seen dealt with and overcome, if that makes sense.
Marshall.
I think we've talked about a couple of the major areas, which is, you know, there's the setting up of technology, the partnership, the financial industry, the education of the recipient so that they understand. But one other area I would warn people to give some attention to is this is a government program that we're talking, or government programs across many governments, and governments tend to have policies, regulations, and laws. Sometimes we will have these payment mechanisms, these payment vehicles. They're empowered by these regulations, but sometimes those regulations can also start to require payment vehicles. It's very important to look at the supporting policies to see if they are not only empowering new solutions or the use of debit card, or are they actually going to hinder the use? We found a lot of examples of that in our growth.
Excellent. Just someone's mentioned around serious privacy considerations in where they are, which is in Canada, and they've asked about stipulating agreements around data collection. But Prodromos, obviously there's a GDPR and that kind of thing. Could you share a little bit how you've approached that, please, and your thinking around that? You're on mute.
Sorry. No, we're very cautious about how we may use data. Obviously, everything is anonymized, so we don't have data on a personal level from the users of the cards. And also there are additional safety valves, let's say, in order to make sure that we only get like the broad pictures in specific areas where we see that and the ways in which the card is used with the aim to improve social policy. So there is a number of safety valves in that process, and certainly we do not keep track of how someone spends the money through their money
exactly.
through the card.
Thank you. And Simon, I'll come to you. We just got space for one more section now, so I'll ask you if you want to respond to that question on privacy, and then other than that, you know, do you have sort of practical encouragement for people thinking about these programs? How would you advise them to proceed and get things set up well?
See, on the data piece, not a data expert in Canada, so it's difficult to comment on the specifics there. But a bit like was just discussed, it's anonymized. It's the issuing partner, it's the banking partner that actually holds a lot of the data in terms of if people are worried about views of spending, etc. It's not typically the government that has that, it's the issuing, the banking partner. And banks are used to that. Again, it's what they do. They're regulated, they're licensed, it's how they sort of manage and support that data. More what we've been talking about today, data today, has been reporting, analysis, understanding, insights, rather than personal data. And I think that's the point. But as you also then led on to say, you know, kind of any sort of closing thoughts and words of encouragement, maybe going back to your question about challenge, and I think the questions being asked today from the audience, it can feel unknown, payments. It can feel a bit scary, but it doesn't need to be. And I think the panel members have brought that to life on very large programs, very well trusted infrastructures. There's people that can help out there. There's industry. There's of course MasterCard that can help shed the light on how a program can operate. Easy for me. I've been here 19 years, so I know the payments. But it's people who don't work in payments. Why should they understand that? But they can rely on those other people for the understanding of what the service model could look like. How are we going to support cardholders? What will we do if somebody loses the card? There can be 101 million questions that can float around in somebody's head if they're going to look at a new kind of disbursement model using prepaid. I think my closing comment there is rely on the industry, rely on those experts, let them help and guide and scope, and that public-private partnership to kind of build those right type of solutions to help and support.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We're just about out of time there, but I want to thank the audience for all the questions that they've sent in and for their engagement today. And to answer someone's question, yes, we will send out the recording after the event so that you can share it with your colleagues, and we'll also have a write-up on Global Government Forum. And so with that, I just want to thank the speakers, Simon, Prodromos, Lee and Marshall. Thanks for taking part today and sharing your experiences, and we look forward to following how these programmes that you've mentioned today evolve. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.